So how do we ensure that moving forward, that we will not have that overclassification? So how do we tease out a child that easily can kind of go in that bucket, right? We can be, you know, OHI, having gone through that with my own son when he was evaluated. OHI was kind of the eventual right place to put him, but we went through a lot of data. So we have to rule out so many other things, right? Whether we're looking at a learning disability, whether we're looking at a speech and language issue, a reading disability, a math disability. There's so many other things that are there. And so one of the things that Laura and I started talking about was even reviewing the tests that we use to evaluate our students so that we can really get to the nitty-gritty of their skills. Because classification is all about readiness levels. So what are the readiness levels of our kids? And that's where you determine the classification, and then you develop an IEP. And so not looking at them as deficits, but looking at them as readiness levels. What are they ready for? Because that's where you teach from, right? And that's very important. And we've even informally kind of kicked around this idea of having our teachers fill out like strength profiles as opposed to the deficit thing. And it's not like a fault. Oh, it's not my idea. I don't know where I stole it from, but it's not a reflection on our teachers in Hastings. It's just something that when you're coming to the table to have a conversation about a learner who might be struggling, often you just want to zoom in on that issue and try to address it, and we lose sight of those, well, this is what that child can do, right? And these are the strengths that child does have, because that will influence how you're going to intervene, right? You're not just going to intervene from that deficit point. And so that's something we've talked about as well. And it's a mindset, but it's important that you step into that conversation looking through that lens and embracing that mindset. So that piece is there.
I just do want to say, I don't want anyone to worry. We're not going to go back and pull out all of the OHI classifications and run those meetings again and figure out. We're not looking to, you know, change any of that stuff. We're looking to move forward. We do every 3 years when you have a reevaluation. Every child has a reevaluation every 3 years. And part of that reevaluation is to ask ourselves those same 2 questions that we ask at an initial. Is a child eligible for one of the 13 classifications? If the answer to that question is yes, are they in need of special education services? And if the answer to that question is yes, then we develop an IEP. So every 3 years we will continue to ask ourselves those questions, and a lot of times, even this year for the reevaluation meetings that I've run, a lot of times we have relooked to say, so you can have, a child can have more than one disability, and Dr. Katzman did talk about that, but what at that point in this child's career do we think was the overarching disability? And there were a lot of classifications that were changed, just because it's just fluid and that's what happens. But we are not looking to rehash and pull up and look at everybody who's OHI. I don't want people leaving here saying, if my child's OHI, I have to worry about what's going to happen. We're not looking to do that. We're really just looking to be about thoughtful and moving forward.
You should also know, and this is kind of like informal research that I did in reaching out to colleagues who are in districts that are similar SES, OHI is often at the higher end of the type of classification that happens in similar communities. And that's deep-rooted, and that's about advocacy and about agency and about capital that doesn't necessarily exist in other communities. It's not a critique or pro or con, it's just that's a reality. So that notion of overclassification in OHI is not uncommon to see in similar districts. But it's great that it's brought to our attention, because now we can be mindful of it, and it's simple as looking at what assessments we use to assess our students, right? The other thing is we talked about point 6 was about communication and positive relationships. Oh, again, I didn't do that, I promise. I don't know what just happened. I don't know. It's really Amazon. It's very sensitive, and I am not really good at it. Thank you. At least you don't have to go to the gym later, Doug. Just keep going back. In point 6 of the audit is this notion of positive relationships and communication with the community, and that is something that's incredibly important to me personally, if you haven't been able to tell by my over-communicating, and also very much important to Laura, and Laura brings a very unique lens as a former building principal, where, you know, whether you want to communicate or not, you have to all day, and not that anyone wouldn't want to, but and you kind of bring that with you to this work, and it's very, very important. So coffees already exist, and Laura can speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we started coffees, normally I think, gosh, help me out guys, it's 16, 17, did we start in 2 years? So we've done 2 years, 15, 16, 16, 17. We did 2 years. Those will continue. We've talked about how we want to make them evolve into something different. We did some mornings and we did some evenings. We did 3 per building. They look different in each building. They should look different in each building. And we want to just, you know, we're working with SEPs on how to maintain that and have them be most productive to what meets the needs of those buildings. There was something that Dr. Katzman actually recommended. It was called the Toolkit of Resources for Engaging Families in the Community as Partners in Education. That was actually directly written as a resource in her audit. So I found it and I printed it out and I've read it, and I'm excited. I feel like it's truly a toolkit. It lists, there's 4 parts to it: building an understanding of family and community engagement. Part 2, building a cultural bridge. Part 3, building trusting relationships with family and the community through effective communication. And Part 4, engaging all in data conversations. So I feel like it touches on so many great things. And the fun part about it is it's got activities in it. Actual activities that we can go through. So it's not just about reading and then saying we're going to do it. It's about a little bit of reading and then actually participating in fun activities. So I think that this is really going to be a huge piece, especially because we're going to be working together so much, developing the standard operating procedure manual, that this is going to be a great piece to throw these activities in and help us guide through and just to build relationships. So I'm excited about this. It was a good recommendation from Lauren.
So I think it's important to us, and certainly something we talked a lot about as a board, and I think the community spoke to when you were looking for your new superintendent. This notion of transparency, this notion of communication. Of course, when it revolves specifically around special education, you also want to be mindful of confidentiality, right? Because we're not talking about specific kids, but we certainly can talk about our practices. We can certainly talk about our beliefs. We can certainly talk about our programs. And so I think as a leadership team and as a team of teachers that are working within our district, if we're at a point where we can confidently stand behind that the decisions we're making are in the best interest of kids, then there's nothing wrong with being transparent about that and sharing that and engaging families in those conversations. Not that we're making those decisions in isolation. It is a collaborative process, right? But we need to be open with that communication. So that'll definitely be at the forefront. And it's work that we're going to be doing as a district as well, which goes back to my community engagement survey. All right, this is the last piece, and we save this for last because this actually touches on one of the root issues in the audit. Really actually goes back to general education and the instruction that happens in our general education classrooms and what that looks like, because it has a direct impact on every learner, whether they're classified or not. And so this point here, point 5 in the audit, spoke specifically to the need for the district to develop high quality and inclusive instruction for both classified and general education students. And that came throughout the audit, like the needs for Laura to dovetail with our curriculum person when we find that person, and myself, but to also work closely with our building leadership team, to work closely with our teachers, to have conversations with CSE chair people. All those things very much need to be in place. But before that happens, we need to be mindful of general education, that classroom setting. What does teaching and learning look like? So as an aside that links to this, though, we know that Hillside right now is immersed in some work around literacy, and they're working very closely with the literacy staff. Developer Gravity Goldberg is her name, and I really love the work that she's doing. I'm excited about that work. And what's great about this whole balanced literacy model that Hillside is working towards, and it's a process, it's a journey, but what is great about it is that ultimately it's about differentiation of instruction just naturally, because the mindset is about teaching the reader, not teaching reading. It's about teaching the writer, not teaching writing. And when you can target instruction in that way, it changes the way instruction unfolds, right? I'm not saying it's like infallible, it's not. No instructional model is perfect, but it is research-based and it is effective and it works in communities across SES, across geographic location. And ultimately it's rooted in this sense of this notion of gradual release of responsibility. I do, we do, you do, right? And as a teacher, you support just even